Hello, and welcome to this portion of our session today. We are going to shift gears a little bit. That was a fantastic presentation that just went before us, our panelists talking about on-site automation and the applications there. We're beginning to kind of look at a different theme around automation and its ultimate convergence with some other trends in and around prefabrication. Prefabrication as a means and a methodology that the industry has been exploring for literally decades is seeing a lot of adoption. And I think that's a lot to do with the increased risk and uncertainty that we just continue to find ourselves in. It's February going into March of 2022, heels of the pandemic, lots of global geopolitical uncertainty. We have supply chain stresses, labor shortages. There's just a lot of stress on multiple industries, and especially ours, as we're also on the other shoe, responding to explosive demand. And both of these topics, the convergence of prefabrication and automation, really hit to the heart of those opportunities to be able to rise to the occasion. So I'm really excited to bring on this group of panelists, a real powerhouse of individuals and organizations that are right there at the forefront of blending both opportunities around automation and prefabrication. So I'd like to go ahead and invite them to our presentation. And Platt, I'll start with you. If you don't mind, maybe spending just a couple of minutes here introducing both yourself, your role, and specifically what Branch Technology does.
Sure. Thanks, Stacy.
Sure, absolutely.
So again, my name is Platt Boyd. I'm the founder and CEO of Branch Technology, and I've been in construction for 23 years. I'm an architect by background, training, and practice, and was a partner at a firm where I had been for 15 years, and then left that 7 years ago to found Branch. And so what Branch does is we prefabricate facades for commercial buildings using construction scale 3D printing and large robots. And we have a 50,000 square foot facility with the largest fleet of prefabrication robots in the US, really the world. And so it's doing some interesting things. And really it's about design freedom and what architects have been dying for a long, long time, and making that available in normal construction budgets.
Perfect, Platt. Thank you. It's an exciting topic. It's been amazing watching you guys in the market over the past decade or so. I'm going to be happy to kind of unpack that journey a bit more. Janet, yourself, you're muted, by the way, it looks like. Oh, there you go. Can you introduce yourself and your team at Modulous?
Thank you. Yes, very happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation. So Janet Stephenson, I'm Managing Director of Modulous in the US. It's a UK company that was founded about 3.5 years ago. So I'll tell you a little bit about Modulous and the setup, and then I'll go back a little bit to my own background. The company was founded very much on the belief it's very driven by providing homes that are safe and sustainable and comfortable for everyone, solving the housing crisis, whilst also meeting the climate crisis through the solution. And prefabrication and modular delivery is very much a key strategy around that business model. We're currently focused, I think it's probably helpful for this audience to know, on multifamily buildings that are around 4 to 8 stories. It's a steel modular structure. And we have a digital design solution that is based on the physical kit of parts. But our physical parts and our physical delivery is not based on owning our own factory. So there's a lot of conversation about asset light, asset heavy business models. We're very much on the asset light standpoint. And so working with manufacturers, what we've done is we've reduced about 1,300 different components into under 10 sub-assemblies that are designed with ease of assembly in mind, as well as sustainable performance. And we're currently tracking at about 5 people, taking about 3 hours to assemble one module. That module is assembled close to project site, not on the project site. We can talk about the benefits of that later, and delivered to general contractors. So it's a complex, in many ways, business model, but we've got 3 very clear offerings. For developers and architects, it's a software feasibility cost management tool and design tool. And for contractors, it's sort of the physical delivery of the module, almost like a material subcontractor, if you will. So we're not the general contractor, we're not the developer, we're not the architect. We're truly an enabler of modular delivery and fast understanding of what's possible on site. So we launched in the US in the summer of last year, and in large part that was thanks to the demise of Katerra, which I'm hoping is a familiar name in the audience. But the CEO, Chris Bone, recognized that there was a certain amount of experience based on dedication to industry change. And I had led national sales for Katerra for the last 4 years. And my colleagues who form our founding team in the US all come from having led product design, operations, new product introduction and engineering and design. It's not a criteria to join our team to be a Katerra alum, but we will be growing this year, and it's an exciting year in validation and testing around the assembly delivery of the physical kit of parts this year.
Absolutely. Speaking of economics, the housing crisis is yet another one of them that I should have swung at with the intro. We do have a third panelist. There's Dan. Welcome. Speaking of automation and tech, Dan. Welcome. Good to see you. You mind spending a few minutes introducing yourself and the effort at Toggle?
Sure. My name is Dan Blank. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Toggle, and we are a prefab technology for rebar. We pre-assemble rebar using industrial robotics and automation offsite in a prefab facility. And basically what we're trying to achieve is a way to dramatically accelerate the process of building with the world's most consumed construction material, which is reinforced concrete. So by taking this process, which traditionally for generations, if not over 100 years, has been done manually on site, the installation or tying of rebar, we bring it off-site, do a lot of the heavy lifting and tasks with industrial robotics and automation systems, and deliver it pre-assembled to our jobs where it can just be dropped into place and concrete can be poured faster. So basically accelerates the amount of time that would have been spent doing that manual install. And the history of the company is that we started in 2016 after seeing the way that renewable energy was constructed, because it's with renewable energy assets, you have very modular systems with a lot of repeatability. And so a lot of efficiency sort of above ground with the equipment that was being installed, but the below ground foundation elements, which are reinforced concrete, were still being done, with this traditional method. What we found over time is that reinforced concrete being so ubiquitous, there's a huge opportunity to do pre-assembly of rebar across all different categories of construction. It's not just for energy or renewables, high-rise, urban construction, infrastructure. All of these have just an incredible amount of rebar in them. So that's what Toggle's focused on, and we're located in the Northeast US. We have a prefab facility that services about a 600-mile radius and up into Ontario, Canada a bit.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dan. Platt, I'm going to go back over to you. We'd really like for this audience to kind of begin to get an understanding of not only that notion, that interplay between additive manufacturing and prefabrication and industrial robots, but you mentioned a concept of architects wanting design freedom, focusing those applications on facades. What's the big lift here? What's the difference? What's the spread here between these types of innovations versus traditional delivery?
Sure. Yeah. Traditional design freedom right now on commercial buildings is just color or texture, or like you do boxes in different ways. So ours is completely three-dimensional, and so we've got the ability to modulate design and unprecedented design freedom. And so that's really what it's bringing to the table, and what that accomplishes for properties is that it sets it apart in the market. Like, it does something that nothing else can do, and makes that distinctive. And so like that can help people in that market, like a developer. They need eyes on and foot traffic in, And so it helps them gain that. For like a general contractor, if they propose this as a part of a RFP solution, it can set that RFP apart from competitors. And then for architects, they win work by design awards. And so this helps them do something that a lot of other people cannot. And so those are some of the things that are relevant, hopefully, to this audience for what we're bringing to the table.
Yeah, I think what really sets you guys apart from a lot of what the broader prefabrication and automation effort is, you guys are embracing mass customization. So Janet, I'd love for you to potentially tee off on that whole perspective of Modulous and the kit of parts, the standardization. Obviously, that's going to get us into economies of scale and production efficiencies. How do you guys think about customization at Modulous? And then maybe even zooming back out, what does that mean for your big your great villain around the housing crisis?
Yeah, no, thank you for teeing that up, because it's clearly a big pain point, right? And architects and developers and many people, when they're just talking about prefabrication and modular delivery in general, have a natural response of going, the constraint, and how can it be site context sensitive? But really what we're really focused on is, with the kit of parts, is standardizing the internal components of a building. It's standardizing a lot of the work that architects find themselves doing time and time and time again in an unnecessary way. It's standardizing components so that, I'm borrowing a story from a manufacturing company that we're in partnership with, but they worked on two residential, well, they were office towers, and they were practically identical, but for 6 inches in the corridor, which meant that they had to completely push out all of the manufacturing equipment that they had set up in order to serve one building and start afresh for an entirely it was just like, it was a phenomenal amount of waste for really what impact, and it was just for the 6 inches of drawings. And so that's an example of what can be sort of minimized. But there's a really important conversation about making sure that standardized tools allow for custom expression. And we have really focused on the internal modules of unit layouts for multifamily housing. We know that those unit layouts work through a lot of testing, both for a little bit of historic testing through Katerra and 4 years there, but also some additional testing in the US today. Our library will grow, but it is naturally quite contained so that we can get out the ground and test with consistent data. The important thing is it really supports any kind of facade and any kind of facade sort of material and treatment. Our module is steel, so that does actually naturally allow for a lot of other sort of options. And one of the things that you'll see, particularly in some of the UK buildings that are going up, in the UK, they're a little bit more advanced than the US, but they have a very, very different kind of look and feel. And so we really can respond to different neighborhood zoning regulation and indeed some climate zones as well.
I appreciate that. And before I get to Dan, I'd love what I'm hearing with that design for manufacture, the opportunity with the standardization around the kit's parts is almost like a design optimization exercise, to where constraints are actually good to help narrow down and create efficiencies. I'm curious, you guys have an offering for not only designers, but also the investors / developer stakeholders in the spectrum. I'm imagining optimizing investments are part of the offering there at Modulous as well.
If I may, just one of the things that really drew our entire team from ex-Katerra to this particular business model is that the software that's developed is being developed in absolute conjunction with a physical solution for now, right? And so the software won't work. People don't need to trust it unless we can prove that the physical delivery also works. And with the physical delivery working and demonstrating the cost and schedule and massing, then the software can be trusted. And so at the moment, we're in this wonderful phase of really having a tight connection with the physical kit of parts and the software. What that allows is very, very early feasibility that's based not just on massing from regulations, looking at the massing that's allowed on site, but actually from physical dimensions that we know informing the massing of those studies. So it really does allow for a cost and schedule sort of understanding at an early stage for a developer that is based on reality. And indeed for the architect as well, they're often asked to develop a lot of different concept schemes. That's often on their own dime in that early stage. And so it reduces both the cost of sale for the architect. It also, very much like branch technology, sort of addresses one of those really difficult aspects of our current fragmented industry, which is architects very, very rarely have cost information at the tip of their fingers.
I love it. I'm going to continue to echo the optimization opportunities here. I mean, you've got it on the investment side, you've got it on the design side, you've got it towards the means of production, and I think that's personally what motivates me the most. Our host has reminded me to introduce myself, so sorry, Dan. So I'm Stacy Scopano again, and I am the National Director of Prefabrication for J.E. Dunn Construction, a national builder across multiple asset types here in the United States. So with that, Dan, speaking of an optimization opportunity, I think about you guys not only as just rebar, but I mean you're kind of a labor solution here on steroids. Can you talk about implementation on the projects that you've done? How are you coordinating your productivity, your interplay with crews out on site, how you work with potentially even superintendents to kind of manage the handoffs here? Can you kind of broaden that perspective on optimizing for production around the workforce?
Sure. Well, the coordination question is a big one because, being a technology company that, is expected to come in and disrupt things, we actually really focus a lot of our energy on not disrupting because we are fitting into an existing workflow. And, honestly, we've had some of our best luck with really just focusing on the service and the material and telling our customers, look, it's going to be the same rebar, that you're accustomed to assembled, virtually in the same way, like you're going to, have the same end result. And we're here to work with you on how that slots into your workflow. So when it comes to coordination, we are trying to, reduce a certain amount of on-site labor that's happening, moving that process off-site, taking it off of the critical path. And so we do need to coordinate in terms of fitting into that. But what we find is that on some jobs where we're doing the vast majority of the rebar, we're basically taking the entire rebar install schedule out, and it becomes just a delivery day where rebar's picked off the truck and basically dropped into its final place. In other instances, there is the exact same kind of challenge that any other trade subcontractor would have, where you have to coordinate deliveries and releases and adjust to weather changes and design changes and that sort of thing. So we're very much operating on that front, just like any other contractor or material supplier or trade.
If I go further upstream with Toggle, submittals, the coordination with engineering, what does that look like? Well, how much of an impact and early involvement you guys prefer/require when you guys are looking at trying to create these larger assemblies?
Well, I think this idea of modularity in a kit of parts has been touched upon, and there's an enormous opportunity with rebar to move in a direction that's more standardized. But rebar is the perfect example of mass customization, where it really is done. Every single bar in a building is looked at for every single building or every single structure, from from a blank sheet of paper. So, there really isn't a lot of standardization. And so what we're seeing is that, if we want to fit into existing work cycles, we often have to just build to order, basically take the structural drawings, detail in the rebar in a standard fashion, and then, build what results. But if we can get involved in the conversation earlier, particularly with vertically integrated builders, that are in some cases designing, building, self-performing concrete, that sort of thing, you can get into those conversations earlier and say, look, if we standardize columns, for instance, for a high-rise building, and even if we're over-dimensioning them for, some of the instances, you're ending up with a little extra steel in there, we can still come out ahead because we're standardizing parts and we're producing them more efficiently. So that's kind of the trade-off there is, and we have to do both. In some instances, we have that opportunity to have the conversation earlier. And, we found with certain types of companies, as I mentioned, and EPCs that are doing utilities and energy work, where they are the engineer and the builder, that works great. But in others, you just build what's needed.
So before I want to bury into that topic a little bit more with both Platt and Janet on early involvement. I think that's probably a gating function for both of your efforts. But Dan, you talked about building a lot of momentum and probably solving a really big need around the explosion in renewables. You have other markets that you're serving, especially for our audience, who I will remind to go ahead and put any questions in the comments for our group. We'll open it up for Q&A here in a few minutes. But yeah, beyond renewables, where's Toggle seeing some early interest or maybe even some early wins?
Well, we definitely love high-rise buildings. I mean, columns, as I mentioned before, is a really great application for what we do. And if you go 50, 60 stories up, you're going to have hundreds and hundreds of columns in that building. So, just pre-assembling columns can take a day off of the rebar install and thus off of the floor cycle for putting up a high-rise. So that's a great one. And otherwise, we're looking for large projects that have a lot of repeatable shapes. So, high-rise buildings, renewable energy, because you're talking about rows and rows of, equipment assets on the ground, some types of infrastructure and utilities. Those tend to be the great projects and segments for us.
Yeah, so I appreciate that, Dan. So Platt, maybe a couple themes there, that early involvement from a process and implementation, best practices at Branch, from what you've seen and that collaboration. But also, I think with you, you're a little bit unique on being a little bit more agnostic from economies of scale, small, big, large, medium, where Dan likes to burn and rip high rises. I can totally appreciate. We all do. But maybe you can talk to both perspectives.
So yeah, ideally, we get involved at the beginning of a project at the concept and schematic design phases, especially when we've got several different product lines, but one that was introduced last year was a partnership with Scopano, who makes mega panels for commercial construction. And so when you get into something like that, the building design needs to be engineered and designed around that concept of putting those mega panels on the building, and then the result is that it reduces the skinning of the building by 80%, and so it helps things go much faster than if doing it with traditional on-site. In our other product categories, like the rain screen, that can come in, and we've had projects where it's flipped while it's under construction, after the contract is awarded, and we can be a substitute on panels on a project, or on another one, it was at 90% CDs. And we showed a couple concepts, they integrated it into the design package, and then we were incorporated. And so it really depends on the product type when we absolutely have to get into that conversation. But ideally, earlier is better.
And I'd actually like to unpack that a little bit more, Platt. The later decisions to potentially alt to a branch driven solution. What was the decision rationale there? And obviously projects were probably marching in one direction. Was it availability? Just look too vanilla? You rationalize some sort of feasibility there. I'd love a little bit of inside baseball on some of those conversations.
Yeah, it was aluminum composite panels that we were substituting for on a project, and they were pretty vanilla. And so we came in there, we showed a couple schemes, here's what's possible, and they said, oh my gosh, we can do that. And then they've been awarded national awards based on that project and the innovations behind that facility. And it was a bank. And so they've been recognized for like innovation in the banking world for some of the things that they're doing, and that substitution being one of them. So it's interesting to see what the outcomes are after somebody uses it and sees, oh, this really does set us apart, and not only just the building, but as an innovator.
Yeah, no, totally appreciate it. So Janet, I'd love to revisit that theme of early involvement. I mean, you can't get more early involvement as rationalizing someone's investment pro forma for our industry. So can you talk about that? I'm assuming that has to be Modulous best practices and kind of a implementation starter kit for you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. There's a couple of different ways of thinking about this, or sort of different threads too. You know, one is just that multidisciplinary engagement right up front, which would avoid something like, hey, if you have the manufacturer in the room, you may avoid having that 6-inch change in the corridor, right? And so part of that is bringing information up front to the architects, to the developers, so that there's sort of all of the considerations of the project, not just a linear progression of unearthing things and implications. So many of that is baked in upfront with the kit of parts. The main thing, though, I think that's really struck my mind listening to this conversation is mindset, right? And it's a lot of people feel that they come with a concept, and then you're like, how do you take this concept and modulize it so that it can be delivered in a prefabricated way, which is certainly, you know, an approach. I think one of the things that I've personally been on a little bit of a mission on, even since sort of Katerra, but also with Modulous, is if someone is interested in the value of prefabrication and modular delivery, then if they allow us to say, well, what would we do on this site? Like, how would we approach it? And that's the way that you get really the greatest value out of the system, right? So there's often this little tension about, well, I want the traditional approach, but just sort of with a modularized or a prefabricated delivery, which is possible. It's just not necessarily providing the greatest opportunity to get the value out of that method of construction.
So Janet, I'm glad you kind of opened the door there. I mean, we have a little bit more than 10 minutes, so I want to kind of end this last 10 minutes on exactly that, some potential hurdles or challenges on implementation, the opposite of best practice there. And I think what I was hearing from you is the kind of cake and eat it too mentality of, you know, I want my safety, but I want to also try to deploy a more prefabricated or optimized approach, and how can we have a foot in both ponds? Can you talk about that in a little bit more detail on what begins to send projects with this kind of design for manufacturer kit of parts approach a little bit more south, and then how to prevent that from the start?
Yeah, you know, for starters, it really is pairing with partners, particularly developers and architects and general contractors, that are open-minded to take a look at what the possibility is, right? Partly it's knowing what your rule set is so that you can guide your client through the rule set. You know, that yes, if that's what you want, we can do it. However, here's the impact that that's going to have. Or be strong enough to say, if that's what you want, actually, we're not the right partner for you, and you should go traditional, right? But if you want the value, this is how we can deliver it. And if it's not meeting what the partner needs, then obviously there's a continuous improvement feedback loop into the product development process. You know, we have modules, but we also have little flex blocks, which allow us to really maximize the FAR on site in a way that a lot of people are concerned that that a stacking module doesn't provide. That's one example of, really understanding what, how we can serve those needs.
No, I appreciate that. And Dan, I'm going to maybe ask you a very similar question. I mean, Janet talked about, making sure right from the get-go the partners are right-sized. I'm sure you have, and because your approach is so innovative, I mean, you're doubly innovating, right? Much like the team at Branch, you're doing industrialized robots, you're adding assemblies and prefabrication. How do you right-size your customer, your projects, and then when have those conversations potentially painted you in a corner where you didn't want to play? And how should a broader set of potential projects think about evaluating Toggle?
Well, I do think the concept of a partnership is really important. We look for customers and partners to work with that are very much interested in exploring different ways to do things. Even though we, as I mentioned, work very hard to accommodate existing workflows and to fit into that, ultimately it's always about some amount of change, and that's the investment you're making in exchange for the gain in efficiency or the accelerating of your timeline, or shoring up a labor shortfall and that sort of thing. So I think the cultural fit between customers and us as a service provider is really important, particularly at this early stage. But I think once you get beyond those types of things, it's still construction. We're still part of a large coordinated orchestra, and communication is really key. It's a service-oriented interaction, so we have to be able to accommodate the reality on the ground and what our customers need, and that just boils down to a lot of the same issues, like delivery logistics and accommodating design changes, that sort of thing. So I think just learning and realizing that we're still a construction company, even though we're also a technology company, is really important.
I appreciate that, Dan. The question, I hear a lot of service from both of you, and of course, I think that rings true for all of us. Dan, to be intentionally reductive, which I know you're probably not going to like, what do you think is the biggest pain for those partners of yours that you're resolving? Is it a labor supply? Is it a schedule constraint? I know they're hard to parse. They're very related. Can you put a sharp pencil tip on those prefabricated assemblies that bots can build for you?
Yeah, well, it's actually exactly the two things you just said. We have two categories of customer pain points. One is a labor constraint, where there simply is not enough skilled labor to do the rebar install, and it might be because the project is too large. And the most skilled people are needed on site for very specific things, but there's a lot of pre-assembly that also needs to happen. Or it could be just a labor shortfall overall, where there simply are not people available. So that's a big one, and it's a labor capacity driven pain point. And then the other one is the acceleration. Particularly with renewable energy, which we mentioned before, we're going through this massive wave and boom in terms of installing more renewable energy, and the people and the companies and the builders who are putting that stuff in place, they want to do as many projects, as many megawatts and gigawatts as possible every single year. And so if there's anything that they can do to keep the economics working, but squeeze in extra projects in the year, increase the amount of throughput, that's what they're thinking about. So that's why they're looking at any way to do that.
No, I can totally appreciate it. That's what I was trying to say at the onset of the panel. The explosive demand is great for business. It's also outright scary when you actually see it. So I can totally appreciate that. Platt, I think your response to the implementation considerations are probably going to be interesting. You're selling lack of constraints. So I'd love to know, what are some good guardrails for something that has complete freedom as its value proposition?
Yeah, no, we did an experiment last year with the partners, the Stowe affiliate partners. Sent them a set of panels that are within our ability to mill. So we mill robotically to get to the surface finish. Well, they're doing the finishing on these with their Stowe products. And so we wanted to understand what are their limitations on finishing ability, because you can do almost anything with a robotic mill, any pattern, texture. So we got feedback, and so where the sandbox was this big initially, we said, okay, well, based on those constraints, let's make the initial sandbox a little bit smaller so that it's easier to finish and it doesn't take quite so much time on some patterns. So, and we're publishing that as a design guide now. And that's something that we say, here is the size of sandbox that's appropriate for the initial rollout. Once additional innovations can occur, then we'll remove those constraints and even have even more design freedom. But everything has constraints. Everybody believes you can do anything with 3D printing, and you can do almost anything with 3D printing, is the truth. So it does have great design freedom, though.
Yeah, I mean, if we zoom out, Alice mentioned this a little bit in the previous panel about the acceleration of tech over the last decade, and I think where you're seeing us right now, Platt, exactly with that response is no longer are we talking about the possibility. We're building these implementation frameworks, all of us, and these guidelines on best practices, and that definitely shows a different level of adoption, a different level of momentum, and of course the demand side, not the supply side of the equation, beginning to constrain quite a bit. I'm curious with kind of that step through technology adoption, Janet, maybe for Modulous, with only a few minutes left, so I'm going to ask you guys maybe to answer this next question, maybe a minute or less. What's the next 5 years look like for your efforts?
Yeah, we're really excited. You know, there's an increase we as in the whole industry is still very, too small a percentage of the overall construction. And we're increasing rapidly, which is really exciting. So we can certainly see, we're not the only people that have a physical kit of parts. We're just using our physical kit of parts to test our software. What we're really excited about is our software's capability to connect with other people's physical kit of parts and truly provide much more of an ecosystem and a marketplace. So that's an evolution of collaboration. I think I want to reinforce Daniel's suggestion that sort of disruption is no longer necessarily the sort of aspect du jour. Like disruption creates negative energy. Correct. So why not enable and facilitate instead? So I think that we're going to see sort of a really strong collaboration between sort of people in the innovation and Contech space, which is going to accelerate general adoption. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, not to pick on anyone in particular, but moving fast and breaking things isn't really productive moving forward. Dan, the same question to you. Sure. Is it capabilities? Is it new markets? What does Toggle look like in the next 5 years?
I think broadly speaking, it's about reducing complexity on the construction site. Like I think that's a really big priority, for us and for the industry in general. Is just that construction sites, the jobs are getting larger, they're getting more urban. Anything you can do to reduce complexity, safety hazards on the job site is going to be really positive.
Fair enough. Platt, here's the guy with low to no constraints. I think I'll amend my previous statement. How about the next 5 years for an organization like yours?
Yeah, no, we're excited. It's adding scale to what we're doing, and then growing into the demand that the market has for some of these things. And so it's amazing to see, like when we do a presentation, people's their minds start turning, and they start realizing, oh my gosh, the possibilities are almost endless. I can do almost anything. And so in the next 5 years, it's a lot of different initiatives are underway right now. But I think continuing to roll out new products that apply to other building types, like existing buildings, that's something that's in the works. And so that's and providing energy efficiency to existing buildings. And that's a huge and something that we're very interested in moving forward. And so that's a big thing for us in the next chapter.
I love it. Not to be too poetic, but it's kind of like the kaleidoscope. The more you look at it, the more value propositions we can continue to extract. These are genuine improvements and advances. I'm going to make this a little bit more of an abrupt ending, so since we're a little bit past our time, but thank you to all of our panelists and for the work that you're doing, and then sharing the journey that you guys have been on. We wish you all the best of luck moving forward, and thank you, Cam for this session. It's an exciting topic, both automation, prefabrication, the convergence. Dan mentioned complexity earlier. It seems like that should make things more complex, but we're really just trying to, again, respond to that explosive demand and doing more with less. So thank you all.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for the opportunity.